This program is made possible in part by grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the National Endowment for the Arts.
We'll go all the way up there with working with what? We're going to march on the ground.
Right here? That's all?
Yeah.
They're going to take one.
New York City. Soldiers of the 369th New York National Guard parade up Fifth Avenue. Many of these men are the sons and grandsons of the old New York 15th Infantry, the Harlem Hellfighters, who became famous in France as the 369th, the old Rattlesnake Regiment. A veteran of World War I remembers how he and 2,000 others volunteered to join this regiment. The first black American combat troops to fight on French soil. He also remembers how his regiment marched up Fifth Avenue while thousands of New Yorkers cheered. But that was a long time ago. New York, 1913. State military law made no provision for young black men, or even the black veterans of the Spanish-American War, to join the New York National Guard. As early as 1898, black civic leaders backed a bill to amend the law. It had support from military and civilian organizations, and from Major Charles Young, the highest-ranking black officer in the country. But it wasn't until 1913 that this controversial bill passed the state legislature, stating that within 3 months, the Adjutant General shall organize and equip a colored regiment of infantry in the city of New York. Governor William Sulza signed the bill into law in June 1913. The bill got lost in political changeovers in Albany. 3 years passed. Nothing was done. In June 1916, Governor Charles Whitman finally appointed someone to raise the regiment. William Haywood, lawyer from Nebraska, veteran of the Spanish-American War, and colonel in the National Guard. As Public Service Commissioner of New York City, Haywood was familiar with the neighborhoods from which he would recruit. San Juan Hill, the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, and Harlem. Men in search of work had brought their families from the British West Indies and from all over the South. Men like Frederick H. Williams.
When I left the South in 1901, I was about 18 years old. Came to New York. I've been here ever since. But I did a little of everything when I first come here. Elevator, cook, shine shoe, or anything, and then fight like hell to save my life.
Colonel Haywood opened up his recruiting station in a cigar store in Harlem, at the corner of 131st Street and 7th Avenue. No armory had been provided, so the new 15th Infantry would drill in the old Lafayette dance hall up the street. Recruiting was slow. But then the colonel had a stroke of luck. The most famous composer and band leader of the day joined the regiment. James Reese Europe, musical director for the dance team of Vernon and Irene Castle, who gave Europe much of the credit for their popularity. A highly disciplined composer and conductor, Jim Europe organized one of the first black musicians' unions in the country. The founder of the Clef Club Symphony Orchestra became Colonel Haywood's biggest drawing card. Other talented musicians joined the regiment, the most popular of whom was Noble Sissle. Another friend of Jim Europe, and one of the first to lend support to the new regiment, was Ziegfeld Follies star Bert Williams. Williams, a captain in the California National Guard, worked closely with Haywood in the early days of recruiting. Recruiting for an outfit that didn't even have rifles.
Oh, well, there was training with broomsticks and wooden guns in Central Park, Morningside Park, Manhattan. All over here. We'd train all around there, running around with broomsticks down the street. So did Martin with sticks. One of the cuckoo guys again.
Sergeant Noble Sissle, drum major, and First Lieutenant James Reese Europe, bandmaster. Harvard track star Napoleon Bonaparte Marshall, captain and the regiment's lawyer. Charles W. Fillmore, captain, Spanish-American War veteran. George C. Lacey, First Lieutenant from the 8th Illinois. Major Whittemore and Captain Tandy. Arthur W. Little, Major, owner of a printing firm. Laurelard Spencer, Major, aircraft engineer and military secretary to the governor. And Hamilton Fish, progressive in the New York State Assembly, who had been a first lieutenant in the 71st Infantry, New York National Guard.
I joined in a very peculiar way. I served in Plattsburgh a couple of years, a couple of summer training camps, and I was recommended for a captaincy, unanimously by the officers, so I went up there to take my examination, they call it. I had to appear up in Plattsburgh the next year. And in the meanwhile, I had studied the drill regulations and hired someone to teach me, and I knew them backwards. So I knew I could pass any examination very easily. And then if they wanted to ask me in government history, well, I'd gone to Harvard and graduated with some honors, and could have done that too. So I met an old major up there who didn't know me, and I don't suppose he was made a captain till he was well over 50 years old, and he was about 60 then, and a major. And when he heard that I was recommended for captain, and I was 27, he thought I was much too young to be a captain. Well, I tried to argue with him. And I said, now, I've served 3 years in the state legislature. I went graduate honors in Harvard. I was captain of a football team that won the national championship. And I've done pretty well in business since. And I think I'm old enough to be a captain at 27. And I couldn't persuade him. Unfortunately, I didn't know at that time what I know today, that I had a direct ancestor in the Revolutionary War, Nicholas Fish, my great-grandfather. And I have the commissions signed in 1776 making my great-grandfather a major at the age of 18 and 3 months. And I was turned down for a captaincy at 27 years of age. And they wouldn't let me even take the exam because he said, if you take the exam, I'll ask you some questions about cooking in the drill regulation, which you don't know, but I admitted that. I said, I don't know that. But I know the drill regulation as well as you do, and I want you to give me the exam. He wouldn't do it. I said, I'll make you first lieutenant. So I went back to New York the next day, and I met Colonel Haywood, who was just beginning to organize this regiment. He said, "Will you come in with me as a captain?" And I said, "I will." And I joined him. I was one of the first organizers and helped build up that regiment. And I'm very proud of my part in it. And it turned out to be a very unique and a fine combat regiment.
Training for trench warfare took place in the backyards and vacant lots of Harlem and Brooklyn. Colonel Haywood had enlisted the backing of socially prominent New Yorkers, and on October 1st, 1916, the 15th Regiment marched down Fifth Avenue to the exclusive Union League Club. Total strength, 607 officers and men. In official recognition, Governor Whitman and Colonel Daniel Appleton presented the regiment with the New York state flag. 6 months later, with the declaration of war on April 6, 1917, recruiting was stepped up. The neighborhood ladies formed the 15th Women's Auxiliary and joined the drive to bring the regiment up to war strength. A volunteer from Brooklyn, Melville T. Miller.
Well, you know, it's a long time ago, of course. I was 16 years old, and like most crazy kids I met, they got their patriotic feeling, parades and whatnot. My brother was drafted, and I got that great feeling of a crazy kid, as I said before, and so I ran up to the regiment and enlisted. Well, I hung around all day long there, and they said I had to have a parent's consent, and I wasn't old enough, and so they wouldn't enlist me there. So they went to Van Cortlandt Park. They were in tents in Van Cortlandt Park. Up there, and I hung around all day long, and finally, Lieutenant Kennedy, the medical doctor, said, "You really want to be in this thing, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to put you in there." So he put my age up to 19 and a half years old. They wouldn't need parents' consent. And he signed me up. So from then on, I became a member. We were then the 15th New York Infantry. We hadn't got our federal designation of 369th. Every man felt he was in the best squad, in the best platoon, in the best regiment of the whole damn United States Army. Every man had that feeling.
At Camp Whitman, New York, in July, the 15th Regiment was called to active duty and attached to the 27th Division, New York National Guard. A month later, they received orders to proceed to Camp Wadsworth, Spartanburg, South Carolina, along with the other regiments of the 27th Division. Spartanburg's mayor and the Chamber of Commerce announced, "It is a great mistake to send northern Negroes down here. We would not mind if they sent us a regiment of southern Negroes. We understand them, and they understand us. But with these northern fellows, it is different." Despite the official protest, the 15th arrived in Spartanburg for combat training.
We were down with the entire 27th Division. We weren't down there in more than 2 hours when trouble started with the crackers down south. If anybody hears a cracker, I'm begging their pardon, but we went into a little conflict down there, and to keep peace, Haywood pulled some strings and pulled us out of South Carolina and brought us to New York. One to Camp Mills, one battalion to Van Cortlandt Park, one battalion to 68th Street Armory, while the 27th Division still stayed there. So while being restless, the battalion in Camp Mills under Captain Fish, right to the next camp was an Alabama regiment geared to go overseas. Weren't there 24 hours before we started another racial war.
We were all preparing to go abroad, and we had no arm. We had our rifles, we had no munitions. And we were told that the Alabama regiment was to attack us that night. The feeling was very bitter, and luckily, or not now, but the joining 42nd, I think it's the New York Regiment, gave us some ammunition, and so we just anticipated the war was going to begin right in America, because we told our soldiers that if they attacked, they were to fight back, and if they were fired on, they were to fire back. And it looked as if it was going to be a sort of a bloody massacre that night. But fortunately, at the last moment, when they found that we were armed and that would mean bloodshed all down the line, we were able to persuade the Alabama regiment that it wouldn't be worthwhile attacking.
He was a fighter for his men. Him and Haywood was two men you couldn't kick against.
So Colonel Haywood pulled some kind of a strings and got us on a ship to go to France. After a lot of excitement on this ship, mothers coming down, pulling their kids off the ship in Hoboken Pier, because a lot of kids enlisted, they were too young, and they took them right off the ship, see? But nobody was there to take me off the ship. So we went to France on a United States ship, Pocahontas.
They were still in sight of the Narrows when the engine broke down. The Pocahontas returned to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for repairs, and many soldiers got to spend Thanksgiving Day with their families. Just before sailing a second time, the ship caught fire, and repairs took 10 days. They sailed again on the night of December 13th. Early the next morning, the Pocahontas collided with a British oil tanker, which tore a hole in the bow. Unwilling to face family and friends again, the men repaired the ship underway and kept on going. On December 26, 1917, Colonel Haywood wrote in his log, "Landed at Brest, right side up."
And believe you me when I tell you, that was the toughest time of the whole war. That was tougher than all of the bullets and all of the fight and all of the cooties and all of the hunger. Because we got in Brest, and we got in boxcars and rode all night. And it was so cold, and it was 40 in a car. And we landed in San Jose about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And believe me, it was something.
Even harder to take was the hostile reception they got from some United States Marines.
The first day in St. Nazaire, that night they shot one of our men. We retaliated. Every time we went and found our man dead, we found their man dead. The battle got so hot between the Marines and us in St. Nazaire. They said, get them out of there, get them the hell to the front and let them fight because they're bloodthirsty. The Marines was tough for it. I mean, they were tough bunch of boys.
And we got into a camp, and we stayed there about a month and a half. And we found some other black soldiers there. But they were not fighting troops, they were stevedore regiments. The only black soldiers there were stevedores. But we were a fighting troop, according to our colonel. So if a guy's marching and his gun was a little crooked, the guy next to him kicked him so straight in the goddamn knife. You know, we're on to play, you know. They had pride in the company. We're the only individual regiment from any state in the old 48 states at that time ever left the shores to fight in a war under the state flag. And that's a violation of something, brother. Now, let me stress, I say this with no mental reservation, I say this proudly, we had the best band in the whole United States Army, under the command of Jim Europe.
were hundreds of regiments and all had bands. And we had competition with these regiments. And our band won all the competition easily under Jim Europe. At first, they had nowhere else to assign him. And I knew him, so they assigned him to my company, and he ate with me regularly. The blacks are very musical, and they liked it, and they were very good. And some of the different instruments, they were not so good, and we had a very rich man who put up, I think, $10,000 to import some people from Puerto Rico who could play some of the instruments the American blacks couldn't do. So that band was perfected. It was known as really the greatest band. It went to the southern part of France, where the hospitals, and played all over.
So we laid around San Jose for about 2 or 3 months, going down to the pier unloading ships. To do all kind of details, but not fight. And our Colonel William Haywood, at least I brought over here a fighting regiment, not stevedores. But we never see the colonel for about 3 months. He was off in Paris someplace negotiating. He said, I brought fighting troops and they're gonna fight.
General Pershing, commander of the American forces, didn't know where to put the New York 15th. The War Department refused to mix black and white combat troops. There had been plans for an all-colored 93rd Infantry Division, but there was no sign of it yet. And meanwhile, the men of the 15th would have to serve as labor troops. But the British and French needed reinforcements immediately. They had been at war since 1914 and had lost over 1 million men. The French army was on the verge of collapse, and the Germans were now just 60 miles outside of Paris. It was then decided to lend the British and French 4 American, white, divisions and the 15th Infantry New York National Guard. Colonel Haywood returned from General Headquarters with a proposal for his men.
They want to be stevedores or want to fight with the French. We said, fight with the French. We didn't come here to be stevedores. The hell with the stevedores. Every man's voice went up in that barracks, that 9-1 voice. So we said, well, you're going to fight, you'll fight. That's what he told us. So we fought with the French.
And we turned in all of our American equipment. That was our canteens, our rifles, our army belts, and our helmets. We issued French helmets, French rifles, French ammunition, French canteens, and instead of water in canteen, we issued French wine. And we joined the 4th French Army.
The head of that was General Gouraud. He was an old French foreign officer, fought in Africa, lost his arm in battle, and very fine character. And he liked our troops because he was accustomed to black troops. And we got along very, very well with him. I'd gone to school in Switzerland and knew French, not fluently, but well enough. I had to make the main speech there to them and tell them that our troops were coming, and they were coming so fast that sooner or later we're going to win this war. The French had to hold the front until they got there. And we were just the first part of it. The colored troops were there. And Gouraud gave us a great reception. I remember that.
When the village bell will chime that old rhyme, so I saw that when you stand for Mississippi, that glory man of Pomerantz, that gal for my heart. disperato soldat, il viene jusque dans nos bras, égorgé dans fine campagne.
The Argonne Forest was a very quiet sector. There was practically no action. It's just an old French division was holding this section. I imagine the same was on the side of the enemy. And there was no action at all. So they took our outfit and they assigned us to this French regiment. Each man had a French soldier with him. And they were together. Now, neither one can understand the other one's language. I had a little high school French, and I could say a few words, but it meant nothing. So when you're on post at night there with the Frenchman, and he always called the Germans the Boche. See? And he'd say, shh, Boche, Boche, if he heard something. But then sometimes he'd say, shh. And now we're all excited. Kids from New York, all of a sudden, you're in a war. And scared to death and everything else. So every time we saw a blade of grass move, bang, we shout, no. I say, pas Boche means does not do that. So it seems that they were so quiet, but they weren't worried about the so-called Boche. They were hunting the wild boars that was coming through the Argonne Forest we knew nothing about. So this friend said, shh, he had us quiet, and all of a sudden, bang, he shoots. He kills the wild boar. See? Then they talk about barbecue later on. They'd cut out pieces and we had got to eat. That was the strange part. That was the only training we got was with this French red. But our boys being so eager and scared and interested in the war, every time they saw something, they shot. Now this woke the front up because the enemy was getting fired upon more often than they had been. So they started retaliating. That's when the Argonne Forest became one of the most famous battlefields of all times, especially World War I.
Ironically, it was from the French that the men of the 15th learned for the first time their new federal designation. They were now the 369th U.S. Infantry Regiment. By the end of May, the regiment was under fire in advanced positions. A major German offensive was expected at the end of May, but the attack didn't take place until July 14th. Exactly at midnight on Bastille Day, the German guns opened fire and the Battle of Champagne-Marne began. By 2:30 p.m. on the 15th, the word was passed down. All along the line, the 4th French Army had held. A letter arrived from General Gouraud. It is a hard blow for the enemy. It is a beautiful day for France. The young men from Harlem and Brooklyn fought side by side with the French African troops, the Senegalese, and the French 2nd Moroccan Division.
Well, the Moroccans were very good fighters and brave fighters, except one thing. Now, I might be questioning on this, and I don't care. It's from what I seen and what I heard. They could not stand the shell fire, the loud explosion of the big guns. They figured it was something from the heavens there. But for fighting, they used to go over the top with their rifles slung over their backs, with their knives in their hands. They were game, and they wouldn't take no prisoners. They wouldn't take no prisoners. Now, I can say this without fair contradiction. I might be wrong in the amount, but it's something like 200 or 500 francs the French government paid every Moroccan who brought in a prisoner alive. I could have brought in 1,000, I wouldn't get a quarter. But they didn't bring any prisoners, they killed them. They cut their ears off and strung them on a string, tied them around their waist. That was it for the Moroccans. They shaved without lather. What more can I say about the Moroccans? And there was no racial prejudice. They were all colors and all shades. They were black with kinky hair. They were white with blonde hair, but they're all Moroccans. But our boys was pretty good with their knives, too. Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts, two boys in the platoon commanded by Lieutenant Pratt. They were holding out a certain section up in the Argonne, and it seems that we always had listening posts, you see. Now, I'll explain, if you don't know what a listening post was in that type of warfare. Now, this was nothing like the Korean or Vietnam. See, when the troops are holding a trench, very little activity, every night they had a post set maybe 200 or 300 feet from the main body in the trench. And every night they put 2 men out there just to listen and warn if there was going to be a sneak attack. But of course the Germans on that were doing the same thing. So this particular night, Henry Johnson, who was one of the greatest heroes, even greater than Sergeant York, which everybody knows of, were out there when these Germans attacked the listening post. Now, approximately 24 Germans attacked. Needham Roberts got slugged almost immediately, and Johnson fought them off. He shot and he cut and he swung his life around and he defeated the 24 Germans. Those that didn't wound or kill, cut out. He had 21 wounds in his body, but he refused to die. And it took Johnson and Roberts, we finally got out there in the morning and dragged their bodies back. They weren't dead, and both lived through it. Sorry to say today they're both gone. Well, I'm sorry to say today I can say almost anything because most all of them are gone. I'm 75 years old, and I was only 17 then. So it ain't many guys that were 25 or 30 that's here to contradict what I'm telling you.
By the end of the summer, the other regiments of the 93rd Division were in France. The 370th, 371st, and 372nd. Men from Connecticut, District of Columbia, Illinois, Massachusetts, Ohio, Maryland, Tennessee, and South Carolina. But the 93rd was never to fight as a division. The 3 new regiments, like the 369th, were attached to French divisions. In September 1918, all moved into position for the major Allied offensive, the Battle of Meuse-Argonne.
But when we started up the hill that day in Argonne Forest, it was hell up here loose. Company M over here, the French Blue Devil on this side. And Company C, we're going up the hill, and a yell, and that yell was a signal. When we started the hill, most of our men got it from here down.
The final War Department report. The casualties of the 4 black infantry regiments of the 93rd Division. 3,925 killed and wounded.
Frontline trenches, been doggone for us. You see, I'm going to tell you. I'm sitting here talking, but I don't like it. See? Now, after the war was over, we won the war. We lost to Germany, clean out of France.
And as advance guard of the 4th French Army, we were the first troops to go into the enemy territory in Alsace-Lorraine, beautiful place. As we marched into this particular town, I don't quite remember the name, I think it was called Bitchville. The colonel, before we marched in, gave us a command to get into formation. And we straightened up. I struck up the band, and the flag of New York State was flying for the 15th New York Infantry, and our colors flying. And as we approached the town, at the outskirts of the town, which no more than 300 to 500 feet, maybe, wild guess that is, of course, you could see the German troops leaving. They're marching out of the town, and we come in with the band playing the Army Blues. And Jim Europe and Noble Sister was not our band master, our drum major at that time. It was a fellow named Thompson, who has since passed. And we marched into that town, and the people was on both sides. And they were waving. They didn't know whether we were coming as conquerors or liberators. But they were playing it safe, and they would cheer, whether they were cheering happy out of fear to win us over, whether they really were happy. I have no way of telling. But that day, the sun was shining, and we were marching, and the band was playing, everybody's head high, and we were all proud to be Americans, proud to be black, and proud to be in the 15th New York Infantry. What's your next question? We spent 191 days in the frontline trenches. We never lost a foot of ground or a prisoner. So I think that's a greater record than my medal, because my medal is unimportant. I can sit here and brag all day long. But the medal I got, every member of our outfit got. The entire regiment was decorated with a Croix de Guerre by the French government. I had an individual citation plus the medal, but the Croix de Guerre, the Cross of War, was given to every man in the 15th New York. We carried on our flag today. Well, while in the town, we were the boss. Our colonel was just like the town mayor, and we were policemen of the town. We stayed there quite a while. And as the sons and husbands and fathers who were serving in the German army started to come home, we didn't know what they're planning. So the colonel gave orders that no more than 2 or 3 men could get on the corners and discuss things and whatnot, so we had to break that up. So we had the whole play of the town. And of course, the men liked it because the women seemed to be very much excited. There's something they've never seen black people. They might have read about them in their books, but never seen them. The kids used to run up and want to run the hand in the face, see if it would come off, you know. And the women played up there, and the men had a ball. They loved it there. Because whether these gals, I don't know yet today as I look back at my age of 75, whether they were giving into these soldiers in fear, or just they were a novelty, or just whether they were just loose. But all the women couldn't be loose. And so it was a wonderful thing. We had no rapes, no crime, nothing on our house. We did nothing to disgrace ourselves, but we had a ball. The most wonderful day of my life, the day we marched up Fifth Avenue. The first outfit to march onto that Victory Arch down there was on 23rd Street, 22nd Street. That's one day that wasn't the slightest bit of prejudice in New York City. That day, and tell you what day it was? February 1919. Let me see, it must have been February the 21st. Because we came back to Camp Upton where we were all discharged on the 22nd day of February, Washington's birthday, 1919. Right, I came home from the Army. I was 19 years old then. We marched along up Fifth Avenue. Everybody was astounded because we used a new mass formation, 16 abreast. And it was never seen before in this country. It was a formation we learned in France from the French instructors. And it was quite a sight. As we got to Harlem, we opened up the ranks so that the family and friends could see their loved ones. And believe me, they took a good look. Everybody wanted to see Henry Johnson. Everybody wanted to shake his hand. Oh, terrific. Terrific. Oh, we marched up Fifth Avenue. We had parties. We had, oh, the feeling was terrific. Everybody was happy. Everybody was wonderful. After the parade at the Army, and then over here in the Harrison Avenue Army in Brooklyn, had a big dinner. Seems that all these girls from the different churches and so forth volunteered their services. And I met one little girl there who I married later. And I stayed with her for 52 years. That's the picture you saw upstairs. And she's gone. She died in 72. But I met her at that reception coming home from France.
No, God knows how many of them come back, because I didn't come back with the regiment. When I came back in casualty ship. And still I'm here to talk. Thank God for that.
When I came home from the war, I was elected to Congress. Now, I haven't got many blacks in my district, but because I served with black troops, I think all the black troops in the country thought I was their representative. And I would get these thousands of letters wanting compensation and all that. Anti-lynching bill, I put that in. Then there came the Battle Monument Bill, which I had lots of difficulty of doing. And I owed it, of course, and there's an obligation. Those blacks who died, they're fighting for freedom and democracy, as we told them. And I said, these boys fought and died, just the same as the white boys did. Fighting to defend their country and fighting for democracy and justice, and they're entitled to this monument as much as anybody else. And so I got it through the House by just putting the pressure on. And we got it through the House, and I don't know what happened to it then.
It took 10 years for something to happen. In 1937, the monument was built in the Champagne district on the plains of Saint-Pie. An inscription reads, "Erected by the United States of America to commemorate the achievements of our soldiers and those of France who fought in this region in World War I."
Ripon, Séchaud, Ardeuil, Trier. J'étais mobilisé à l'armée.
I had been fighting in the Champagne region since 1915. A lieutenant in 1918, Albert Vérinck.
Un beau jour, on nous a dit, vous recevez en renfort, non pas en stage, des troupes américaines, des troupes noires.
One day, some American troops were assigned to us, black troops, not as trainees, but as reinforcements, and it was our job to look after them.
Naturellement, je les ai répartis.
So I paired them up with my men.
C'est-à-dire qu'il y avait un Américain, un Français, un Américain, deux Français, deux Américains, un Français, avec mission.
The idea was to give them a chance to get to know one another, and for the French to help their new comrades in arms adjust to being for the first time in the front line.
Qui venaient pour la première fois en ligne.
At first, getting reinforcements surprised us.
De voir ce renfort et bien sûr très rapidement très heureux, pensant que c'était.
But it made us very happy to think that this was a prelude to the full-scale American effort to help us chase the Germans out of our country.
À chasser les Allemands de notre pays. Voilà les premières réactions.
That was our first reaction.
Puis ensuite, évidemment, nous avons vu ces braves gens.
And then, of course, we felt a great deal of respect for these men who had come 10,000 kilometers to save our country, but who also risked staying behind in the trenches where we lost so many soldiers, so many men. Again, all my gratitude to our black friends of 1918.
To my old friends, thank you.
Frederick H. Williams, 103-274, Company C, 16th Squad. I taught the men when they come to us. Train them, rather.
When I got out of service, I swore I would never serve another day in this man's army. Because I know there's been prejudice and all that, yeah, but it never touched me personally. You know, I went to school, I come home. My father was fairly well fixed. We ate good and we dressed good and went to school. I didn't run into these things. But I ran into the army. Oh, the army, so I swore I'd never serve another day in the army. And then, of course, when Pearl Harbor struck, you know, it was the same feeling I had in 1917 when my brother was drafted and the war started. So then I went back in again. See? So that's as simple as that. See?
When I was in school, we used to sing it something like this. Listen if you please. Oh, beautiful, oh, spacious skies, for amber waves of rain, for purple mountains, above Now, wait a minute. I'm talking about America. America. You see, God done shed his grace on thee. Well, all right, then he crowned thy good. Yes, he did. Save it, brother, from sea to shining sea. You know, I wish I had somebody out there to help you sing this thing. Save it, brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. Oh, Lord. Oh, I thank you, Lord.
The United States military faced a dilemma in 1917 when the country entered the First World War. What to do about its black soldiers? One Southern congressman introduced a bill forbidding blacks to serve as officers. The bill was defeated, but there were many other indignities to come. Prospective black officers had to take an extra month of training because they supposedly learned more slowly. For the most part, black units were assigned to manual labor and kept far away from combat. In an atmosphere of segregation and discrimination, a regiment of black soldiers was sent to France in December of 1917, where they battled both Germans and racial stereotypes. Officially, they were the 369th Infantry Regiment, but were soon known by their hard-earned nickname. Join us now as the History Channel presents Harlem Hellfighters.
Albany, New York, Memorial Day, 1996. A soldier named Henry Johnson is honored for bravery in World War I. He was part of a remarkable regiment of black Americans who fought longer and harder than any other Yanks in the war, despite brutal discrimination.
Any time that we were involved with Americans, no matter where it was at, we was always ostracized, always pointed out or mistreated.
The discrimination ran so deep, these African Americans had to do all their fighting in the French army. Who were these men? Why did they have to serve under foreign command? And how did they earn the nickname, the Harlem Hellfighters?
The boys, go to it! Hey! Get the bloody boys, get them, stick them, get the bayonets on, ram it on. What do you hear? Nothing near, don't fear, all clear. That's the life of a stroller when you take a patrol out in no man's land. Ain't it van out in no man's land.
78 years after his act of heroism, Henry Johnson was honored. The triumphant story of Johnson and his fellow Harlem Hellfighters, the 369th Regiment, is unknown to most Americans, their exploits omitted from most history books. But it is remembered by men like 110-year-old Herbert Young.
So we fought like Trojans. Ain't nobody tell you no different.
Throughout history, black soldiers have had to fight simultaneously for their country and for equal status within that country. And after each of the battles, their achievements have been ignored or belittled. In the Civil War, there was resistance to using black soldiers in combat. As Union casualties mounted and blacks demanded a role, that changed.
And by the time the war ends, almost 185,000 African Americans are soldiers in the United States Army, and another 17,000 play a role in the U.S. Navy. One of the black troops that was created during the Civil War, a troop had as its banner, it said, "It is now our turn to prove our worth as men." And that notion of proving your worth was central to so much of what went on during the Civil War for black Americans.
After the Civil War, the government organized 4 black regular Army regiments, the 24th and 25th Infantry and the 9th and 10th Cavalry. Because of their bravery and their dark skins, the cavalry were called Buffalo Soldiers by the Indians. The 9th and 10th Cavalry played a crucial role in the Spanish-American War. This film, attributed to Thomas Edison, shows African-American cavalrymen disembarking during that war. Serving on foot, because their horses were left in Florida, the 9th and 10th repeatedly came to the aid of white units. Theodore Roosevelt, in command of the Rough Riders, was the most famous soldier to emerge from that war. At first, Roosevelt paid tribute to the black soldiers, but then turned his back on their contributions.
And even Teddy Roosevelt talked about how these colored soldiers played a major role. Now, it's interesting that Roosevelt says that immediately after the war, but as he enters into public life, he begins to distance himself from the black soldiers, and he begins to say that the soldiers were there, but they really weren't the most efficient soldiers, they weren't the bravest soldiers, that in a way, his Rough Riders carried the day independent of blacks.
One white Spanish-American War veteran who never wavered in his trust of black soldiers was Colonel William Haywood. In 1916, Haywood, an ardent civil rights advocate, began organizing the 15th Regiment, New York State's first all-black National Guard unit, here in Harlem. At first, recruiting was slow, but then Haywood persuaded James Reese Europe, the most popular black band leader of the time, to enlist as a lieutenant and form the regimental band. Europe's musical standards were much higher than the Army's. To accommodate him, Haywood stretched, bent, or broke every Army regulation governing a regimental band. The band was larger than regulation, contained instruments never envisioned by the Army, and was led by an officer instead of the regulation sergeant. Haywood even sent Europe to Puerto Rico to recruit woodwind players because the band leader believed that island had the best in the world.
He brought his band out in little music, the Pied Piper theory, and he started getting his recruits. But that wasn't the hard part, that was the easy part. The hard part was now to get this regiment together, get an association, and get them somewhat trained into a military order. They didn't have any weapons, so they used broomsticks, and they used the backyards to dig trenches and make believe the type warfare that was going on over in Europe at the time, and they did the best they could.
Colonel Haywood tried to affiliate his regiment with the Rainbow Division, a unit being formed with regiments from several states.
He had recruited all blacks, and the division people at the time said, sorry, Colonel, but black is not a color of the rainbow.
Colonel Haywood could do nothing about the Army's strict segregation policies concerning enlisted men, but his officer corps was integrated from the beginning, with some white officers subordinate to higher-ranking black officers.
Well, one of the strengths and one of the most important things, it seems to me, is that the 369th has an integrated officer corps from its inception. And what one is struck by is this notion of providing an opportunity for African Americans to become officers, to become line officers with real duties, with real authority, is something that really begins with the 369th.
When the United States entered World War I, the 15th Regiment was mobilized. Colonel Haywood was convinced that his regiment would distinguish itself. He wrote,
"Given the proper training, these men will be the equal of any soldiers in the world."
The regiment never got proper training because the War Department decided to send most of this black regiment to train alongside white New York National Guardsmen here at Camp Wadsworth in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Spartanburg's mayor set the welcoming tone by saying, "They will probably expect to be treated like white men. I can say right now that they will not be treated as anything except Negroes." Black soldiers were pushed off sidewalks, denied service in shops, insulted. Captain Napoleon Bonaparte Marshall, a Harvard graduate and New York attorney, was called a dirty nigger and thrown off a streetcar. A rumor about a lynching sent armed soldiers into town one night. Haywood raced to town, found the rumor was untrue, and marched the men back to camp. A few days later, Sergeant Noble Sissel, the band's drum major, was attacked by the owner of a hotel when he went into the lobby to buy a newspaper. White New York National Guardsmen surrounded and menaced the hotel owner. A large group of black soldiers started toward the hotel. The commanding voice of James Reese Europe stopped everyone cold in their tracks, and he marched all the soldiers, white and black, out of the hotel. Concerned with the conditions his men were enduring, Colonel Haywood went to Washington and met with the Secretary of the Army.
And the Secretary came up with several possible solutions in moving the unit to another training base or bullying the town into cooperation or whatever it was. And apparently my grandfather came up with a third option, which was send them to France, which they actually did. So that's how they came to be one of the very early outfits in Europe, and principally to get them out of the Spartanburg, South Carolina.
The regiment was not yet trained for combat, but it is unlikely the War Department had any intention that they or any other black soldiers would ever see combat in World War I. Proof of that was the decision not to send the 4 well-trained and experienced regular Army black regiments to France.
When the war breaks out, the United States government decides that it really would prefer that this is a war fought by white Americans. And so its first major decision is that the standard black units, the traditional units, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, the 24th and 25th Infantry, will not play a role in World War I. They are sent to Hawaii, they are sent to California. They are basically kept out of the war.
When they embarked for France, the men of the 15th Regiment had no way of knowing that the War Department planned to exclude black soldiers from combat. A more immediate problem was crossing the Atlantic.
They finally got a ship, I think, called the Pocahontas. They loaded them on board, and I think it went out of Bayonne, New Jersey. And the ship started out, and it broke down. They had to be towed back into port. They got the ship repaired. Soldiers got back on, and then they started out again. And the ship ran into another ship in the harbor, and they had to turn around and come back in again. And Colonel Haywood is said to report to the port commander, who was General Schenck at the time, that he had run into a ship and they were back in the harbor. And this is around Thanksgiving, and the general says, "Goodness gracious, Colonel, you ever going to get those coons and turkeys to France?" Well, they had turkeys on board, which was to deliver Thanksgiving, but the coons, what he referred to, were the soldiers of the 369th.
The men of the regiment spent Thanksgiving in the United States.
At any rate, some time passed, and they finally got the ship repaired again, And they all got on board and they started out, and then they ran into another ship in the outer harbor, but it didn't do too much damage because they were able to repair it while they were on their way.
At the end of the voyage, 2 wars awaited the regiment, one against the Germans, the other against racism. That part of the story, when the Harlem Hellfighters, continues in a moment.
The History Channel returns to Harlem Hellfighters.
Harlem's 15th Regiment arrived in Brest, France, shortly after Christmas 1917, and they boarded boxcars for the ride to a big U.S. Army base.
On the way going to St. Nazaire, they had it was a policy when the regiments passed through the different little places, wherever the Red Cross was, they used to open the windows and serve coffee. But when we would go through a place, they would open the windows. As soon as they see it was a black regiment, they would close the windows. That I know, that I seen with my own eyes.
Facilities at the base were rigidly segregated.
When we got our billets where we were living, and boys started going to the toilets and different things. The first place we went in was all set up white, black, fountains white, toilets white, black. About 2 hours of that, a big fight started. The next day, we assembled, and they issued out picks and shovels. And we, after that, every morning, we would assemble and march down to St. Nazaire and do work, fixing tires and whatnot all through the time. This we done from January until about the end of March.
The band was exempted from labor details. It was dispatched on a concert tour that made musical history. One of the best military bands ever assembled, it performed across France, giving thousands of French soldiers and civilians their first taste of jazz. From the moment the band marched off the Pocahontas, playing a syncopated Marseillaise, it was a hit with the French allies, and even with their barnyard animals. Meanwhile, back in Saint Nazaire, the rest of the regiment rankled under its manual labor assignment. Colonel Hayward lobbied the U.S. command, the American Expeditionary Force, for a combat assignment. He finally got one from the commander of the AEF, General John J. Pershing. Pershing was an old cavalry officer and had served with and respected the Buffalo Soldiers of the 9th Cavalry. When he was assigned to West Point later in his career, he frequently and unfavorably compared the cadets to the black cavalrymen. They retaliated by nicknaming him Black Jack, both for his preference for black soldiers and for his nasty manner. The nickname stuck. The French army, on the verge of collapse after 4 years of war, asked Pershing for reinforcements. He assigned the 3,000 men of the 15th Regiment to the French 4th Army. The African-American soldiers were finally getting a chance to fight. They would be the first black Americans to see combat in World War I, but they would do their fighting in a foreign army because their own had no combat role for them.
We was assembled and was told that we would now be fighting under the French 4th Army. Then they issued us French equipment, gas masks, rifles, and whatnot. The rifles that they gave us was the rifles that they claimed was used in 1870. They were clips of 3 bullets, that's all. We even had French food, and we had French eating time. We had red wine, which I never drank. At 10 o'clock, we had always an issue of red wine. But from then on, we fought under the French, not the Americans. We had never seen no Americans. Every section of front we went on was formerly a French front. The first one was a Noose Argonne. I remember that.
And they were, I believe they were assigned, each soldier was assigned a French soldier that they worked with, they paired up with. And the French had no prejudice about black men being fighting men.
The fact that the 15th had not completed its American combat training was probably a plus. They had fewer American tactics to unlearn, as they were taught French tactics. Veterans of Sandlot and high school baseball, the men were better at throwing grenades than their French instructors.
We were trained to throw them in one way. We threw them the way we throw a baseball. We didn't go through this 1, 2, 3 stuff. Go, grab it and throw it just like you throw a baseball. I could see it first. Yeah, when it was real close.
Ironically, the regiment which had been serving under the New York state flag now got its federal designation, the 369th U.S. Infantry, while serving with the French Army. The American Army, having sent a black regiment to fight in a foreign army, now added insult to injury. A Colonel Leonard in AEF headquarters sent a secret memo to the French urging them not to spoil the American blacks by treating them as equals.
The United States military establishment went to great extremes to try to convince its allies, especially the French, that blacks should not be used as soldiers, or at the very least should be treated in a certain way so they would, quote, still be suitable, unquote, for their return.
The Leonard memo had no effect on the French.
The French received us very good, French soldiers and also the French people. It was fine people, and they wasn't prejudiced. In fact, they would take up for them in fights with the whites. And pretty near all the whites that we met was Southern soldiers. That's when the shock came. And from then on, I experienced segregation in its greatest form. In them days, it was pretty outright, straight outright.
When the Leonard memo came to light, the French Chamber of Deputies passed a resolution affirming the absolute equality of man. By that time, the 369th had delivered its own lesson in the equality of man by performing heroically on the battlefield. James Reese Europe became the first black American officer to go into combat in World War I by accompanying French soldiers on a nighttime raid of German trenches. The rest of the regiment responded bravely to its introduction to combat. Colonel Haywood wrote of his regiment's first exposure to an artillery barrage.
The boys just laughed and cuddled into their shelter and read old newspapers. They are positively the most stoical and mysterious men I've ever known. Nothing surprises them. Captain Clark called for 12 volunteers for a raid, and the company fell in to the last man. All wanted to go, and he had to pick his 12 after all. Do you wonder that I love them? Every one, good, bad, and indifferent?
The colonel also thought he had a mystery for the Germans. He wrote,
"None of my men have been captured so far, and the boys wear a French blue uniform when they go on raids. I've been thinking if they capture one of my Puerto Ricans in the uniform of a Normandy French regiment, and this black man tells him in Spanish that he's an American soldier in a New York National Guard regiment, it's going to give the German intelligence department a headache trying to figure it out."
In fact, the Germans knew there were black Americans in the Allied trenches, and they wanted to capture one.
Well, the story is that Henry Johnson, Needham Roberts, on this outpost, way out in the front of the other soldiers on line. Needham Roberts was on the post looking out when the Germans came up. They shot him, and they grabbed him, and they was getting ready to hustle him away when Henry Johnson heard the commotion, and with his rifle, he started firing into the German platoon, killing as many, reloading as many, clip as fast as he could, and firing. When he ran out of ammunition, he pulled out his bolo knife and jumped into the crowd.
In a letter to Johnson's wife, Colonel Hayward described the rescue.
Fighting desperately, he opened with his bolo the head of the German who was throttling Roberts. Roberts, released from the grasp of the scoundrels, began again to throw hand grenades, and the Germans picked up their dead and wounded and slunk away. So it was in this way the Germans found the black Americans.
So I saw them when they brought them back. Neither one of them could walk. They had Needham. Needham was carried back in the front of Roberts. Roberts was in the back. They had two guys carrying Johnson. And Johnson his legs was gone. His legs was hanging. And the blood was all on the bolo knife they had. They had the bolo knife that he was split the German head with. That was socked with, just caked with blood. And he passed through, he had to pass through our line to come back to get out. That's when I saw him and Johnson.
Johnson and Roberts were the first American soldiers, black or white, to receive the French Croix de Guerre. Incredibly, they received no U.S. decoration for valor.
We're fighting still for Henry Johnson to get one of the highest medals that the United States can offer him. The medal that he got was the medal from France, not from us. It's an honor. And you fight and you work so hard for the country that you live in. It would be nice for you to be recognized by that country.
The 369th continued to fight for their country and for recognition. That story when the Harlem Hellfighters returns.
The History Channel returns to Harlem Hellfighters.
All told, 171 of the Harlem Hellfighters won individual Croix de Guerre from the French Army for exceptional bravery. In one daring exploit, a lone sergeant, William Butler, rescued 5 of his comrades from a German patrol, single-handedly killing at least 5 enemy. A German report on the incident claimed the Americans had attacked, quote, in overwhelming numbers. The overwhelming number was 1. No wonder the Germans nicknamed them Hellfighters. But their bravery counted for little with their fellow white Americans.
Any time that we were involved with Americans, no matter where it was at, we was always ostracized. Always. Always pointed out or mistreated. All I know, I was disappointed and very bitter at the time.
Aware of the discrimination the Hellfighters faced, the Germans bombarded the African Americans with propaganda.
First of all, the Germans recognized that there was something ironic about a people fighting for democracy who technically didn't have it at home.
They always dropped the pamphlets over the outfit that where they think the Negroes was, told us not to fight because we wasn't going to get nothing for it. And they were right. That day they were right, but we didn't know nothing about that. We didn't know what's going to happen when we get back home.
And the idea of fighting in the war was to be a part of the United States, to be a party to their wars, to take the responsibility as citizens, which was sometimes denied, even to the point that they didn't want them as an American unit. They felt by fighting for the United States, even though it was under the French flag, they would gain that recognition. And that's the sort of reason they would never go over to the enemy side.
They just figured that the Germans didn't want us to fight because we were whipping them. That's all. They didn't want us to fight because we were whipping them. They didn't want to fight with the colored boys. Because if they say the colored boys were the best soldiers, the best fighters in the army.
The Hellfighter fighting spirit was proven in the last great German offensive of the war, a massive thrust which began on July 15, 1918.
They gathered us up quickly, and we were still with the French at that time, and shipped us down to the place where the Germans was, they claim, 18 miles from Paris. That's where the French stopped them the last time.
The French had set a trap, pulling back the bulk of their forces and leaving a thin line of defenders, including the Harlem Hellfighters. Assessing the situation, Colonel Hayward wrote,
"The first thing I knew, all there was between the German army and Paris, on a stretch of front a little more than 4 miles long, was my regiment of Negroes. But it was fair enough at that. All there was between us and Berlin was the German army. They tried pretty hard to get by, but they never did. No German ever got into a trench with my regiment who did not stay there or go back with the brand of my boys on them."
When the Germans approached, the Harlem Hellfighters held their line. French artillery pulverized the German army. Gas devices left in bunkers killed thousands of Germans who took refuge from the artillery. The German offensive stalled. In spite of the regiment's successes, the American Expeditionary Force decreed the black units must have either an all-black or an all-white officer corps. Colonel Hayward's black officers were replaced by whites. Only James Reese Europe won a dispensation so he could continue to lead his band. Still, Colonel Hayward was positive.
"I feel it has been a tremendously important experiment when one considers the hosts of colored men who must come after us. I wish I had a brigade, yes, a division or a corps of them. We'd make history and plant the hobnailed boots of the heavy Ethiopian foot in the Kaiser's face, all right."
There wasn't a corps of black infantry, but there was supposed to be a division. By this time, the other regiments that were to comprise the all-black 93rd Division arrived in France. The AEF assigned all of them to the French army as well. But now they were equipped with American helmets and rifles. In the autumn, the Allies mounted their final offensive of the war. This would be the roughest combat the Hellfighters and the other African-American troops would ever see.
So I have to say this much. I pray, and I guess my mother prayed, and I didn't get hit. But so many guys got hit with me, fall. We couldn't stop to pick them up or do nothing with them. We had to keep on going.
They kept on going through heavily fortified German positions, inflicting and suffering heavy casualties. All told in the war, 200 Harlem Hellfighters were killed and another 800 were wounded, about 1/3 of the regiment. More of the casualties occurred during this offensive than at any other time. One of the most vicious weapons in World War I was poison gas. Both James Jones and Herbert Young were victims.
During that time, the second day on the last drive, I was knocked out then by a gas shell. I believe a gas shell. Anyway, when I woke up, I was in the French hospital with a big sign on me, gas, right leg bleeding. That was all in French. But the tag that said gas was in big white letters, gassed. And underneath that was right leg bleeding at knee.
I told him I didn't want to go to the hospital because once you go to the hospital, you don't catch your outfit no more. And I didn't want to leave my outfit. I came with over there, and I wanted to come back with them.
In that final offensive, the Harlem Hellfighters moved further and faster than anyone thought possible. For its heroism in this action, the unit was awarded a regimental croix de guerre by the grateful French. The Allied offensive had broken the German army. The armistice was signed on November 11, 1918 at 11 a.m. The Hellfighters had won all their battles against the Germans. Their fight against discrimination would continue. The story of the Harlem Hellfighters returns in a moment.
We continue our look at the men of the 369th Infantry here on the History Channel.
In the French Army, officers of Hayward's rank were not expected personally to lead their troops in an assault. So, during one battle, Colonel Hayward tore the eagles off his shoulders and led his men. A French general ordered him to retire. He replied,
"My men never retire. They go forward or they die."
They were brave, even theatrical words, but they were also true. Despite the fact that it had less training before going to combat than any other American unit, the 369th had a distinguished record. In his official report on the first black American unit to see combat in the Great War, Colonel Hayward proudly wrote,
"It is my desire to record the fact that the regiment was under fire for 191 days, all told, and during all this time never lost a prisoner, a trench, or a foot of ground."
Their entire war was fought under French command. They never served in an American brigade or division. Their 191 days at the front were the longest service by at least 5 days of any American unit, black or white.
That I know without anybody telling me. Because I know when we hit the line, we ain't never seen nothing else but back and forth. If one group was on there, 10, 11 days, they went back, another group took their place. We're still on the lines, and the only time we got off the line was to go back for delousing.
Even after the armistice, the 369th continued to rack up firsts. It was the first Allied unit to cross the Rhine into Germany. There it established a military government and occupied 3 German towns. The bond between Colonel Hayward and his men would last decades.
Even after the war, when he was had his office on 42nd Street, any of the boys that got in trouble used to go to him. Any of the working boys that got in trouble on the jobs would go to him, and he would go to the front for them. Nobody ever had any kick for Colonel Hayward. They all loved him.
Colonel Hayward and his officers were exceptions to the rule, as James Jones learned in a U.S. Army hospital. Although he was a wounded combat veteran, Jones was pushed to the end of the food line at every meal. He complained to the hospital's commanding officer, who responded,
"And where I come from," he said, "you and your people was always last." That's what he did. And that's why he looked at me like that. So I said, "Well," I said, "ain't nothing I can do." He said, "No, it ain't nothing you can do." He said, "But however you get your meal." I said, "Yeah, I get my meal." And that was all. So I left there.
On February 12, 1919, the Hellfighters returned to the United States aboard the ocean liner Stockholm. As they steamed into New York's harbor, James Reese Europe, unaware of an ironic twist of fate awaiting him, led the band that had made musical history in a concert for the men who had made military history. They had made all that history in a mere 14 months. The return of the Harlem Hellfighters to New York was a triumph. They joined other returning units to march up Fifth Avenue from Greenwich Village to Harlem, marching in a French formation led by James Reese Europe and the incomparable band, enjoying the cheers of all New Yorkers. The Harlem Hellfighters appeared to have accomplished their mission.
Many people felt that that was a moment when New Yorkers celebrated the achievement of New Yorkers, not black New Yorkers, not white New Yorkers. But when the 369th got to Harlem, Harlem exploded. Because in a way, for the citizens of Harlem, this was the unit that had done all that it promised. It had fought and fought successfully. It had done it with pride. It had battled against discrimination. And what it had done was it had proven to all Americans that blacks deserve equality by the fact that they fought and died on the battlefields of France.
Even the Hellfighter wounded got in the parade. They were driven through the streets and cheered wildly. But when the cheering ended, reality set in.
The real war came after they came home. The reason I say that is because the families of veterans suffered very much. So when they came home, there was no jobs and no housing.
But when we got back home, I couldn't even buy a job, no matter what I was doing. I couldn't even buy a job to shine shoes. And I was a good mechanic.
Even for Henry Johnson, who was treated as a hero among heroes that day, the future was grim. Disabled by his wounds and unable to work, he died in poverty and was buried in an unmarked grave.
I think that all wars should recognize the family and the children and the men that went away and didn't come back. And some of them come back and they were of no use to their family, mentally and physically. Because here I am, 75 years old, telling the story of the men of World War I. So who's going to tell the story of World War II and the Vietnam? Who's going to tell it and be concerned about the people that were in those wars?
Even for the great James Reese Europe, victory proved hollow. He had survived the dangers of war and now triumphantly resumed his musical career at the head of the civilian Harlem Hellfighters band. In Boston one evening, he quarreled with one of the drummers. The drummer attacked Europe with a tiny penknife, cut his throat, and killed him. Almost immediately, white America began ignoring the Harlem Hellfighters' contribution, as James Jones learned from the soldier filling out his discharge.
He said, "What battles was you in?" I started naming Newson, Champagne, and he stopped. He said, wasn't no blacks on the front. He said, wasn't no blacks on the front. I didn't say nothing. I was so anxious to get out of there, I didn't open my mouth. And when he said, he started writing his name on the discharge. He gave me the discharge. I looked on the back of it, and he said on the back there he had none. Come back none.
8 decades later, he is still trying to set his personal war records straight. There was still discrimination, still limited opportunity. But part of the legacy of the Harlem Hellfighters was the beginning of change.
It changed everything with black people, First World War. From then on, everything was changed for the black people. But before that, the black people were nobody.
More on the Harlem Hellfighters' legacy in just a moment.
The History Channel returns to Harlem Hellfighters.
After World War I, the 369th Regiment remained an active part of the New York National Guard and continued to make history. Benjamin O. Davis, who became the first black man to earn a star as an Army general, was given command of the 369th, and the regiment added another to its long list of firsts. But there was a long, long way to go.
I know that there was enormous segregation in World War II. Whatever they should have learned from the experiment, the 369th in World War I, they seem to have forgotten at the outbreak of World War II.
Still in segregated units, African Americans again served in combat. But in this war, black GIs kept their American helmets and gear and served in the U.S. Army. The Air Corps grudgingly overcame old prejudices and organized black fighter squadrons which repeatedly outflew the vaunted Luftwaffe. As for the 369th, it was an anti-aircraft artillery unit in the war. Activated for duty, one battalion saw combat in the Pacific Theater. Other elements served in Hawaii and on the West Coast. The 369th was mobilized again during the Korean War, but did not leave the United States. It was during the Korean War that the U.S. military was finally integrated by order of President Harry Truman, himself a combat veteran of World War I. Was the integration of the military part of the Harlem Hellfighters' legacy?
I would argue that there's no doubt that Harry Truman drew from his own experiences when he made that momentous decision. And I think that if the 369th had failed, if an integrated officer corps had not been able to provide the kind of leadership that was required, I think it would have made it harder for African Americans to rise to the ranks of officers.
One of those African American officers, General James, was on active duty when the Army was integrated.
The effect on them, I think it made a better Army because just to give you some of the background, the designation 369th, 371st, units with a 3 were all black units. Units with a 6 were all black units. So if you were going to send reinforcements in and it had a 6, you wouldn't send them to a white unit, you'd send them to a black unit. But all this talent with good units and whatnot, it didn't serve the Army well, because if you had a good unit that was black, you couldn't reinforce them into a white unit.
The 369th still serves as a transportation regiment in the New York National Guard. Its most recent assignment, service in the Gulf War. Perhaps the Harlem Hellfighters' greatest contribution was its indomitable spirit in the face of almost constant adversity.
Well, in spite of the treatment, it didn't take anything away from me so far as serving the country. That part, I just didn't, it didn't touch that part at all. I was just as anxious to do whatever I could as I was when I first went in there, regardless of the setbacks and the prejudice. It was a lot of prejudice, all right. Even the worst part was while you was in France fighting. That's where the part that really hurt.
I never quit, man. I never say quit. Never quit. I was a fighter all my life, and I'm going to keep on fighting as long as I can live. I never give up. I figure there's a will, there's a way. Wherever there's a will, there's a way. If you keep trying, it'll come to you.
President Harry Truman's famous 1948 executive order required only equality of treatment in the military. The order did not mention integration as such, and compliance took a while. The Air Force and the Navy moved first, but not until the shortage of manpower during the Korean War became critical did the Army comply. The Army's last all-black units were abolished in 1954. How long ago and far away all that seems today, and yet the Army is still struggling with the integration of its ranks. Yet this time it's not the integration of the races, but the integration of the sexes. For the History Channel, I'm Roger Mudd. Thanks for watching.